I'm back out in the Philip W. Snyder Wildlife Area near Dayville, Oregon. This weekend, my friend Jason, who runs two popular YouTube channels, Primal Outdoors and Van Camping, is holding his annual campout for his Patreon members. Once again this year, Jason has teamed up with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to organize a volunteer work party as part of his Patreon event. Last year, we were in this same area thinning invasive juniper trees. This year, we're going to take it a step further, clearing more trees for the morning and then planting beneficial native vegetation in the afternoon. I'll explain this in more detail a little later on. First, we're settling in for what's going to be a very cold night of camping. We're camped in the same spot as last year, along the banks of a charming little river. The temperature plummeted as soon as the sun dipped behind the hills, and soon we are huddled around the campfire while Jason models the new wool anorak he has just made.
What? I was sewing everything there.
I'm back to cooking dinner on my trusty old Camp Chef Mountaineer, but I'll talk more about that in an upcoming video. Tucked in this narrow valley, the sun is still a long ways from making an appearance this morning. We all got different temperature readings on our vehicles, but one member with a dedicated outdoor temperature sensor registered 10 degrees Fahrenheit both nights we were there, and this morning everyone is keeping warm any way they can until it's time to head off to the work site. With the equipment all prepped and protective gear adorned, Joe from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is providing us with a briefing of the day's activities and specific areas where the vigorous young juniper needs to be thinned. Before we get to the tree falling action, let's take a moment to talk about what the ODFW is trying to accomplish here.
This charming little plant is called Lesser celandine, and it grows everywhere here in my backyard. In spring, it pops up, it makes this lovely carpet of green, and then comes out with some beautiful yellow flowers. And it's really a very attractive plant.
Now, in its native habitat, it's a beautiful and integral part of whatever ecosystem it belongs in. But here in Western Oregon, it's not its natural habitat. This is invasive here. Because this plant does not face the normal limitations of its natural habitat in terms of whatever climate or maybe animals that eat it or I don't know what, it grows much more vigorously here in Western Oregon than it would normally do in its natural habitat. As a result, when this stuff takes hold, it takes over everything. And I have got this growing everywhere in my backyard. I have been trying for years to eradicate it. It chokes out everything. It chokes out lovely native wildflowers that I used to have growing back here, such as native Oregon bluebells. I'm trying to get rid of this stuff without dousing my entire yard with poison. And so I have been bit by bit working on digging it up. Now, what the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is trying to accomplish in the Philip W. Snyder Wildlife Area is very similar to what I'm trying to accomplish here, trying to get rid of a plant that should not be growing here so that plants that should be growing here can actually survive. And in that wildlife area, those plants that are getting choked out by the invasive juniper are actually depriving wildlife such as deer and elk of the critical winter forage they need in order to survive the harsh winter. So when we first did this juniper clearing last year, and I made a video about it, and I explained all that, or I tried to explain all that in the video, but I still had numerous viewers who were upset that we were destroying so many beautiful trees. And yes, they're beautiful trees, but they naturally do not belong there. Years of fire suppression have resulted in conditions that allow juniper that normally would not survive to grow, and to grow very quickly. And those junipers sap the groundwater that the bitter brush needs to survive. I know it's hard to think of a big tree as a weed, but in this particular ecosystem, in this particular set of circumstances, these young, vigorous, aggressive junipers are essentially a weed. And as I mentioned last year, we are leaving old growth juniper in place, these ancient, twisted, gnarly juniper. This is what you should be seeing on these hills, not these super tall Christmas tree looking things. That's just not natural. So that's why the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is trying to reduce the numbers of them on these hills in this particular area.
Yeah, so this is the area that we cut last year, and you can see all the dead junipers and everything. But one of the things you might notice is all of the bitter brush in this area seems to be very healthy. And another thing that is really sticking out to me is as I look, I can see there is a ton of deer sign where the deer have been coming into this area and feeding, which is great because a lot of this area up high did burn, and this is a winter range for the wildlife area. So having places like this where the bitter brush is healthy and doing well is really going to be great for the deer population in this area.
The first step in bringing down one of these junipers is limbing. Juniper often grows with numerous large branches near to the ground, so they need to be removed in order to provide unfettered access to the trunk. These thick lower branches can also cause a falling tree to behave unpredictably, both by skewing the balance and by causing the tree to bounce erratically. Once a tree is limbed up, a wedge-shaped face cut is made in the trunk, facing the direction the feller wants the tree to fall. With the wedge removed, it's time for a back cut aimed at the vertex of the wedge. Usually, the saw doesn't even need to actually reach the face cut before the tree will start to tilt, and gravity will take over and break off the remaining holding wood. In this part of the Philip W. Schneider Wildlife Area, the ODFW is opting to leave the felled trees in place. We're adjacent to last year's worksite, and you can see some of what we cleared in 2024. Joe from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife explained that not only do the fallen trees provide habitat for small animals and shelter for new sprouting bitterbrush plants we're trying to encourage, but the freshly fallen juniper also provides a much-needed snack for the hungry mule deer, as they will immediately move into a cleared area to nibble the tender upper branches of the trees that would normally be unreachable.
These older growth junipers, we're choosing not to take them because they may have some archaeological significance to the area, and archaeologists in the area have asked us to leave those behind. And they're easy to see because they have some interesting shape, often kind of different shoots, but they look a little bit more hardy and scraggly than, say, some of the other ones that are younger, which are just growing straight up. And even though they may be taller, doesn't necessarily mean that they are older than this particular type of tree here.
We're working close to the road this year, and at times, the safest option is to fell a tree onto the road. When this happens, in order to clear the way for vehicles to get through, it's necessary for the crew to cut it up into manageable pieces. This is called bucking in lumberjack terminology. After a physically demanding morning of limbing, felling, and bucking, the crew is taking a well-deserved lunch break and surveying the progress we've made this morning. a lot of invasive trees came down, and this is good news for the native bitterbrush and the future generations of deer and elk who will feed on it. After lunch, everyone gets set up for planting bitterbrush seeds. We'll spend the afternoon seeding both the parcel we cleared last year, as well as planting seeds in the area we've freshly cut this year. We have an ample supply of bitterbrush seeds, and everyone takes a baggie full, as well as a specialized planting tool, and heads back up the slopes.
We have these tools that were made specifically for this purpose, and what they do is the seed goes down the tube and down into the little bit of a divot that we make with the spade piece of the end of this, and then we cover it back up, and it's supposed to emulate like mice taking the seeds and stashing it, which is what they have found is the best way to get bitterbrush to grow in the area.
After a noisy and strenuous morning with the buzz of numerous chainsaws echoing through the valley, everyone is in agreement that hiking the hills in the peace and quiet against the stunning backdrop of this rugged winter scenery makes for a very pleasant task. The sun has burned through, and we're relishing this beautiful afternoon in a beautiful corner of Oregon. While the bitterbrush in these hills appears to be lifeless and inedible, a closer look reveals the countless branches are replete with tiny green growth. These tender shoots provide essential sustenance for the deer and elk in the depths of winter when nothing else is growing in this harsh, frozen ecosystem. Bitterbrush is very slow growing, with a bush of this size being potentially 50 to 75 years old. So anything we can do to help it thrive will be beneficial to the dwindling deer and elk populations in this area. After a hard day's work, we've gathered at the local ODFW facility where Joe's wife has grilled up a mess of burgers and dogs for the crew to feast upon while swapping stories of the day's toils. Thanks again to Jason of Primal Outdoors and Joe and Jake of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for an enjoyable weekend and for the opportunity to give back to these public lands we all use. Thank you for watching.